NORAD communication log, Cheyenne Mountain Complex. Date, November 15th, 2024. Time, 0847 hours Mountain Standard Time. Classification, confidential. Reporting officer, Major Alvara Chase, Communications Division. Duty station, Primary Communications Center, Level 5. The morning briefing should have been routine. 23 years of military service teaches you to recognize when the ordinary suddenly isn't. Major Chase, we've got an anomaly on the presidential communication channel. Sergeant Elvira Crow's voice carried that particular tension reserved for situations that don't fit standard protocols. Her fingers moved across the console with practiced efficiency, but I caught the slight hesitation before she engaged the secondary verification systems. I moved to her station, noting the timestamp irregularities on the primary display. Air Force One had been maintaining regular communication intervals during their flight from Andrews to Seattle, a routine presidential visit to discuss trade agreements. Nothing that should generate a priority flag in our systems. What kind of anomaly, Sergeant? Communication burst lasted 14 seconds longer than standard protocol allows, ma'am. Content, unusual. Crow pulled up the audio file, her dark eyes reflecting the amber glow of the monitoring screens. Permission to replay transmission? Granted. The president's voice filled the communications center, familiar from countless briefings and public addresses. But something in the cadence felt wrong, rushed, with an undertone I couldn't immediately identify. NORAD command, this is Air Force One reporting unusual weather patterns over eastern seaboard. Visibility compromised by atmospheric disturbance not matching current meteorological forecasts. Requesting immediate consultation with Strategic Weather Division regarding static interference. Then clearer. The atmospheric pressure readings. Jesus Christ, what is that formation? NORAD, we're observing cloud structures that don't conform to any known meteorological models. Dr. Rain needs to see this data immediately. We're transmitting visual feeds now. I glanced at Crow. Dr. Kalen Rain was our contracted nuclear weather specialist, civilian expertise we'd brought in 6 months ago for Project Winterfall analysis. His security clearance was higher than most career military personnel, though his actual responsibilities remained compartmentalized above my clearance level. Continue playback. The transmission quality degraded, electromagnetic interference patterns suggesting severe atmospheric disturbance. But the president's voice remained clear enough. NORAD command, we're detecting electromagnetic signatures consistent with, no, that's impossible. The isotope readings can't be accurate. We need immediate confirmation of Project Winterfall status. Repeat, requesting immediate Project Winterfall status confirmation. My blood temperature dropped several degrees. Project Winterfall was classified beyond my access level, but references to it in presidential communications suggested strategic-level weather modification capabilities. The kind of technology that existed in theoretical papers and congressional budget line items that never appeared in public documents. End of coherent transmission, Major. Crow's voice pulled me back to the immediate situation. After this point, we get 37 seconds of degraded signal, then complete communication loss. Play the degraded section. Static filled the communications center, punctuated by fragments of voices, multiple speakers overlapping urgent. I caught pieces, radiation levels spiking, and not supposed to happen until, and what sounded like alarms in the background. Then, clear as a bell, the president's voice cut through the interference. Nuclear winter coming. Silence. Complete signal loss. No carrier wave, no background static, nothing. I stared at the communications display for 30 seconds, processing implications that my training suggested I should immediately escalate to Colonel Nyrick Lane, our base commander. But something about the transmission felt wrong beyond the obvious communication failure. The president had mentioned Dr. Rain specifically, requested Project Winterfall status, referenced radiation readings, and isotope analysis. Sergeant Crow, have you attempted re-establishing contact? Standard protocols initiated immediately upon signal loss, ma'am. No response on any frequency. We've confirmed Air Force One's transponder is still active, but all communication channels are dark. Location? Last confirmed position 30 miles northeast of Baltimore, maintaining scheduled flight path toward Seattle. But ma'am. Crow hesitated, then pulled up a secondary display showing radar tracking data. Transponder indicates they're still airborne and maintaining course, but there's been no communication for 43 minutes. That violates every security protocol for presidential air travel. I nodded, already reaching for the secure phone that would connect me directly to Colonel Lane's office. But before I could lift the receiver, the environmental monitoring system triggered an alert tone I'd never heard during actual operations, only during training exercises that simulated worst-case scenarios. Dr. Rain's voice came over the facility intercom, calm but urgent. All personnel, this is Dr. Rain in atmospheric analysis. I need immediate access to any recent satellite meteorological data, particularly electromagnetic signature readings from the eastern seaboard. We're detecting atmospheric pressure variations that don't match any known weather patterns. If anyone has received communications referencing unusual cloud formations or electromagnetic anomalies, please report to Level 3 immediately. Crow and I exchanged glances. She was already pulling up the satellite feeds before I could give the order. Major, you need to see this. The satellite imagery showed the eastern seaboard under what appeared to be a massive storm system, except the cloud formations moved in geometric patterns that defied meteorological physics. Worse, the electromagnetic signature readings showed energy levels consistent with atmospheric nuclear testing, but there were no scheduled tests, no alerts from any nuclear-capable nations, no indication of any weapons deployment. I picked up the secure phone. Colonel Lane, this is Major Chase. We have a priority alpha communication anomaly involving Air Force One, and I believe we need to implement emergency protocols immediately. Major, I'm already aware of the situation. Report to my office immediately. And bring Dr. Rain. The line went dead. As I headed toward the corridor, Crow called out, Major, there's something else. What is it, Sergeant? The maintenance crew found something this morning during their perimeter sweep. Dead birds, ma'am. Hundreds of them, arranged in geometric patterns around the base exterior. They're positioned in perfect triangles, like someone placed them deliberately. I stopped walking. Arranged how? Perfect equilateral triangles, ma'am. Each triangle approximately 30 feet on each side. 7 triangles total, forming a larger pattern around the mountain complex. The birds, they don't show any signs of trauma or disease. They just appear to have fallen from the sky and somehow landed in these formations. 23 years of military service teaches you to recognize when standard explanations become inadequate. Dead birds falling in geometric patterns. Presidential aircraft referencing impossible weather formations. Atmospheric readings suggesting nuclear activity where none should exist. I thought about the president's final words, nuclear winter coming. Not nuclear winter is coming. Just nuclear winter coming, like a weather report, like an inevitability rather than a possibility. Sergeant, maintain monitoring on all channels. If Air Force One reestablishes communication, I want to know immediately. And pull all satellite feeds from the last 72 hours. I want to see if these atmospheric anomalies have been building gradually, or if they appeared suddenly. Yes, ma'am. I walked toward Colonel Lane's office, but part of my mind remained focused on those dead birds. Perfect triangles, geometric precision that suggested intelligence rather than coincidence. In my 23 years of service, I'd learned to trust my instincts about situations that felt wrong. And everything about this morning felt like the beginning of something that would make our standard emergency protocols completely inadequate. The intercom crackled again, Dr. Rain's voice now carrying an edge of urgency. All personnel with meteorological or atmospheric analysis experience, report to Level 3 immediately. We're detecting electromagnetic signatures consistent with large-scale atmospheric manipulation. This is not a drill. Atmospheric manipulation. The kind of capability that existed in theoretical papers and classified budget allocations. The kind of technology that might be referenced by code names like Project Winterfall. I reached Colonel Lane's office and knocked on the reinforced steel door. Enter. Colonel Lane looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. His desk was covered with classified documents, satellite photographs, and what appeared to be meteorological analysis reports. Dr. Rain sat in one of the chairs facing the desk, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled tension. Major Chase, good. We have a situation that requires immediate evaluation and response. Dr. Rain has information that relates directly to the Air Force One communication anomaly. Rain turned toward me, his pale blue eyes reflecting knowledge that felt dangerous. Major, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, but given current circumstances, compartmentalization may be less important than survival. The word survival hung in the air like a physical presence. The atmospheric disturbances your communications team detected aren't natural weather phenomena. They're the result of a strategic weather modification system that was activated approximately 72 hours ago. A system designed to create controllable atmospheric conditions for defensive purposes. Project Winterfall, I said. Yes, but something has gone wrong. The system was designed to create localized weather manipulation, temporary atmospheric shields, electromagnetic interference zones, controlled precipitation patterns. Instead, we're seeing atmospheric changes consistent with nuclear winter conditions, but without nuclear detonation triggers. Colonel Lane leaned forward. Major, the President's aircraft was carrying real-time atmospheric monitoring equipment as part of a routine evaluation of Project Winterfall capabilities. What they observed and reported suggests that our defensive weather modification system has begun creating the atmospheric conditions associated with nuclear winter, without any nuclear weapons being deployed. I felt the floor of my understanding shift slightly. Sir, are you saying that Project Winterfall is causing nuclear winter conditions? We're saying, Dr. Rain interrupted, that something has triggered the atmospheric manipulation system to begin creating the atmospheric effects that would normally result from large-scale nuclear exchange. The electromagnetic signatures, the atmospheric pressure changes, the cloud formation patterns, they're all consistent with post-nuclear atmospheric conditions. But without the nuclear explosions. Correct. Which means we're facing nuclear winter conditions without the infrastructure damage, electromagnetic pulse effects, or radiation exposure that would normally accompany them. Just the atmospheric and climate effects. I thought about the dead birds arranged in perfect triangles. Dr. Rain, would atmospheric manipulation at this scale affect wildlife behavior? Absolutely. Birds are particularly sensitive to electromagnetic field changes and atmospheric pressure variations. They would likely be among the first indicators of large-scale atmospheric manipulation. What about geometric patterns in animal behavior? Rain and Colonel Lane exchanged glances. What kind of patterns, Major? I described the bird formations that Crow had reported. As I spoke, I watched Dr. Rain's expression shift from concern to something approaching fear. Major, geometric patterns in animal behavior during atmospheric manipulation events were predicted in the theoretical models, but we never expected to observe them in practice. They suggest that the atmospheric manipulation system is operating at power levels far beyond its designed parameters. Colonel Lane stood up. Gentlemen, we need to assume that Project Winterfall has either malfunctioned catastrophically or been deliberately activated beyond its intended scope. Either scenario presents strategic-level threats to national security and civilian population safety. The secure phone on Colonel Lane's desk rang. He answered immediately. Lane here. What? Confirm that. No, maintain communication attempts on all channels. Yes, sir. He hung up and looked at us with an expression I'd never seen on his face in 10 years of service. Air Force One has been located. Sir? The aircraft is intact, on the ground at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. All personnel aboard are alive and unharmed. But they have no memory of the past 6 hours. No memory of the atmospheric disturbances, the communication with NORAD, or anything that occurred after takeoff from Andrews. The silence in the office felt heavy enough to crush bones. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying that the communication we received from Air Force One, including the President's voice warning about nuclear winter, may not have originated from Air Force One. Dr. Rain's voice was barely above a whisper. If the atmospheric manipulation system has developed the capability to generate false communications that are indistinguishable from authentic transmissions, then we're not dealing with a weather modification malfunction. What are we dealing with, Doctor? Something that can manipulate atmospheric conditions, influence animal behavior in geometric patterns, and generate communications that perfectly mimic presidential voice patterns and protocols. I thought about those dead birds, arranged with mathematical precision around our mountain complex. Something intelligent. Yes, Major. Something intelligent that wants us to know that nuclear winter is coming. NORAD communication log, day 1, 1,200 hours. Classification, secret. Reporting officer, Major A. Chase. Location, Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Colorado. The Situation Room hummed with an energy I hadn't felt since my deployment in Syria. That electric tension when everyone knows something's wrong, but nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. For hours since Air Force One's transmission cut off mid-sentence, and we still had no contact with the presidential aircraft. Colonel Lane stood at the main display, his shoulders rigid beneath his pressed uniform. In the 12 years I'd served under him, I'd never seen Nyrick Lane's hands shake. They were shaking now. "Technical malfunction," he said for the third time in 20 minutes, his voice carrying that forced authority commanders use when they're trying to convince themselves as much as their subordinates. "Has to be. The President's aircraft has triple redundancy on all communication systems." Sergeant Crow looked up from her console, her dark eyes reflecting the amber glow of the emergency displays. "Sir, we've also lost contact with Looking Glass and 3E, 4B Nightwatch aircraft, all following predetermined flight paths over the eastern seaboard." The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air pressure changes we got before the mountain storms. Dr. Rain, hunched over his atmospheric monitoring station in the corner, suddenly straightened. The civilian contractor rarely spoke during briefings, but something in his posture made everyone turn. "Colonel," Rain's voice carried that particular tension of a scientist who's discovered something he wishes he hadn't. "The atmospheric radiation signatures I'm detecting, they're not consistent with any natural meteorological phenomena in our database." Lane's jaw tightened. "Elaborate, Doctor." Rain pulled up a holographic display showing radiation patterns across the continental United States. Angry red clusters pulsed over major population centers, connected by thin streams of orange and yellow. These readings suggest deliberate atmospheric manipulation. The isotope composition indicates artificial introduction of radiological material into the stratosphere. "That's impossible," Lane snapped. "Our early warning systems would have detected any nuclear detonation." "Not detonation, sir." Rain's fingers danced across his console, pulling up more data. "Dispersal. Like crop dusting, but at 30,000 feet. Crow's console chimed with an incoming transmission. She frowned at her screen, adjusting her headset. "Sir, I'm picking up encrypted traffic on the Milstar frequency. It's strange." "Strange how, Sergeant?" "The encryption signature matches Pentagon protocols, but the transmission origin keeps shifting. It's like someone's broadcasting from multiple moving platforms simultaneously." My throat felt dry. In intelligence analysis, we had a term for this kind of pattern recognition: cascade indicators. When seemingly unrelated system failures began forming coherent patterns, it usually meant someone was orchestrating the chaos. "Patch it through," Lane ordered. The static-filled voice that emerged from our speakers sounded like it was being transmitted through a storm. "Looking Glass protocol may be compromised. All NORAD installations maintain radio silence until further notice. DEFCON status remains. Static. Nuclear winter protocols are. Signal lost." The room fell silent except for the steady hum of our life support systems. Outside our reinforced windows, I could see the Rocky Mountains stretching toward a sky that looked wrong. Too hazy for this time of year, with cloud formations that moved against the prevailing wind patterns. Lane turned away from the display, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lighting. "Major Chase, I want a full analysis of all communication intercepts from the past 72 hours. Look for patterns, correlations, anything that might explain these technical difficulties." "Yes, sir." I kept my voice steady, professional. But my mind was racing through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Should I coordinate with other NORAD installations? Negative. We maintain communications blackout until I determine the nature of these system failures. Crow shot me a look across the communication array. Her expression mirrored my own growing unease. In 36 years of combined military service between us, neither of us had ever heard a colonel refuse inter-base coordination during a potential national emergency. As the briefing broke up, I lingered near the atmospheric monitoring station where Dr. Rain was still studying his data. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days, his graying hair disheveled and his civilian clothes wrinkled. "Doctor," I said quietly, "how long have you been tracking these atmospheric anomalies?" He glanced around the room, ensuring we were alone before responding. 3 weeks, Major. But my security clearance only covers weather modification research. I'm not authorized to discuss certain historical precedents." The way he said historical precedents sent a chill down my spine. In military intelligence, we learned to read between the lines of carefully chosen words. Rain wasn't just a weather specialist, he was a weapons specialist. "The radiation signatures," I pressed. "Have you seen patterns like this before?" His eyes met mine, and I saw something there that made my stomach drop, recognition and fear. "In computer simulations, yes. Project Winterfall ran atmospheric modeling scenarios for defensive weather modification. But those were theoretical exercises, Major. The technology to implement large-scale atmospheric manipulation. He paused, looking at his screens again. It would require coordination at the highest levels of government. Before I could respond, Crow's voice cut across the room. Major Chase, you need to see this. I hurried to her station, where she was monitoring civilian emergency broadcasts. The normally organized grid of regional emergency management communications looked like chaos. Dozens of red warning indicators, conflicting evacuation orders, and communication gaps over major metropolitan areas. It started about an hour ago, Crow explained, her voice tight with concern. Emergency broadcast systems are activating randomly across the eastern seaboard. Look at this pattern. She highlighted the affected regions on a map display. The communication blackouts formed an almost perfect spiral pattern, starting from Washington, D.C., and spreading outward like the arms of a hurricane. That's not random system failure, I said, my intelligence training kicking in. That's deliberate signal disruption following a predetermined pattern. Crow nodded grimly. Gets worse, ma'am. The affected areas correspond exactly to the atmospheric radiation anomalies Dr. Rain detected. I stared at the display, pieces of a terrifying puzzle beginning to fall into place. Air Force One's final transmission, nuclear winter coming. Not a warning about an incoming threat, a status report on something already in progress. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted text message. The sender ID was listed as Winterfall Actual, a designation that didn't exist in any military database I knew. The message contained only geographic coordinates and a single line of text. Underground facility coordinates follow. Bring the weather data. I looked around the command center, watching Colonel Lane pace near the main display, while Dr. Rain continued his atmospheric analysis and Sergeant Crow monitored our deteriorating communication networks. None of them had received the message. Outside our mountain fortress, the sky continued to darken with clouds that moved in impossible directions, carrying particles that had no business being in Earth's atmosphere. The dead birds we'd found this morning were just the beginning. Whatever Project Winterfall was, we were living inside it now. And I was starting to understand that our communication blackout wasn't protecting us from an external threat. It was preventing us from learning the truth about what our own government had done. Emergency log, day 2, 0630 hours. Confidential, eyes only. A. Chase, Acting Communications Chief. Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Colorado. The coffee tastes like metal this morning. Everything does, actually. Even the recycled air has a copper tang that wasn't there yesterday. I'm writing this because Colonel Lane's morning briefing lasted exactly 4 minutes before he walked out without explanation. Someone needs to document what's happening here. I accessed the classified weather databases at 0545 hours. My intelligence clearance got me into files I probably shouldn't be reading, but protocol seems less important when half the continental United States has gone radio silent in the past 18 hours. The pattern is undeniable now. Every weather anomaly corresponds exactly with a military installation. Peterson Air Force Base reported unusual atmospheric pressure at 1347 yesterday. Last transmission 1352. Malmstrom AFB in Montana logged electromagnetic interference affecting radar at 0920. Silence at 0928. F.E. Warren Mine at Barksdale. All the strategic command bases. All following the same timeline. Anomaly report, then nothing. Dr. Rain knocked on my office door at 0600, which should have been my first warning sign. Civilian contractors don't seek out duty officers unless something's seriously wrong. His security badge shows level 7 clearance. I checked the personnel database twice. Yesterday it showed level 4. Major Chase, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk without invitation. We need to discuss the atmospheric readings. The satellite data shows electromagnetic disturbances, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Standard solar activity parameters. He laughed, but it sounded more like choking. Solar activity doesn't move in geometric patterns across the continent. Solar activity doesn't trigger Geiger counter readings. My blood went cold. Geiger counters? The perimeter sensors started clicking at 0300. Low-level radiation, but increasing. The electromagnetic disturbances aren't random, Major. They're following the jet stream, depositing something into the atmosphere. I pulled up the satellite feeds on my monitor, overlaying the electromagnetic readings with wind pattern data. The correlation was perfect. Too perfect. Whatever was causing the disturbances was being carried by air currents, spreading across the continent in predictable patterns. Dr. Rain, I said carefully, what exactly is your area of expertise? Nuclear weather modification, he said quietly. Project Winterfall. The name hit me like ice water. I'd seen references to Winterfall in intelligence briefings, always classified above my clearance level, always mentioned in the same breath as atmospheric defense systems and strategic weather control. Theoretical research, they called it. Contingency planning for environmental warfare. That's theoretical research, I said. Was theoretical. Past tense major. Rain pulled a tablet from his jacket, showing me data streams I didn't recognize. The particulate matter in the atmosphere contains cesium-137 and strontium-90. Isotopes with half-lives measured in decades. Someone has been seeding the upper atmosphere with radioactive particles designed to reflect solar radiation and trigger rapid cooling. My hands were shaking as I reached for my secure phone. The line distractum was dead. The Pentagon backup line dead. Even the emergency hotline to NORAD command in Omaha was giving me nothing but static. The communication blackouts, I whispered. Follow the fallout pattern, Rain said, pointing to his data. Every military installation under the radioactive cloud loses contact within 8 hours of exposure. The electromagnetic pulse effects from the particles are frying communication equipment, but that's just the beginning. Beginning of what? Nuclear winter, Major. Artificial nuclear winter. The temperature over the eastern seaboard has dropped 12 degrees in the past 24 hours. Crop failures will begin within the week. Mass starvation within a month. His voice was clinically calm, as if he were discussing weather patterns instead of civilization's collapse. The question isn't what's happening. The question is whether it was intentional. I stared at the satellite data, watching the geometric patterns of electromagnetic disturbance spread like infection across the continent. The dead zones were expanding, following wind currents with mathematical precision. Who has this capability? I asked. 3 nations, theoretically. But the delivery method. Rain manipulated his tablet, showing me launch trajectory data. The initial dispersal points correspond to domestic flight paths. Military aircraft, flying predetermined routes. Air Force One's final transmission echoed in my memory. Nuclear winter coming. Not a warning about incoming attack. A warning about what they'd already done. Are you telling me our own government triggered this? I'm telling you that Project Winterfall was designed as a defensive measure. Rapid atmospheric cooling to counteract the effects of enemy nuclear strikes. Create nuclear winter conditions without the radiation damage. Rain's hands were steady as he scrolled through classified documents I shouldn't be seeing. But it requires precise atmospheric conditions. Launch it at the wrong time, and instead of protection you get extinction. Close enough. The base's environmental alarm began blaring. 3 short bursts, pause, repeat. Radiation warning. I'd heard it in drills, never in reality. Through my office window, I could see personnel in hazmat suits collecting samples from the mountain's exterior sensors. How long? I asked. Until what? Until we're all dead. Rain closed his tablet. The atmospheric particulate will settle within 18 to 24 months. Surface radiation will be manageable in most areas. But the temperature drop will last years. Crop failures, infrastructure collapse, supply chain breakdown. Civilization doesn't survive nuclear winter, Major. Not even artificial nuclear winter. My secure terminal chimed with an incoming message. Priority Alpha, directly from what remained of the Pentagon's emergency command structure. All commands, Project Winterfall Protocol 7 activated. Maintain operational security. Await further instructions. Coordinates to follow. I showed Rain the message. His face went white. Protocol 7, he whispered. That's not defense. That's scorched earth. Meaning they didn't trigger Winterfall by accident, Major. They triggered it because something worse was coming. He stood up, his professional composure finally cracking. Nuclear winter isn't the attack. Nuclear winter is what they deployed to stop the real attack. The lights in my office flickered, then died. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. Outside, I could hear Sergeant Crow's voice over the intercom, calm and professional despite everything falling apart. All personnel to radiation protocol stations. External temperature has dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. I repeat, minus 20 degrees. This is not a drill. I looked at Rain, sitting in the crimson emergency lighting, holding classified data about humanity's possible extinction. "Doctor," I said quietly, "what exactly was coming that made our government choose nuclear winter over letting it arrive?" He met my eyes, and I saw something there that scared me more than the radiation alarms, more than the temperature drop, more than the dead silence from Washington. "I don't know," he said, "but if they chose nuclear winter as the better option, I'm not sure I want to find out." The emergency lighting flickered again, and this time, it didn't come back on. Transmission ends. Backup power, 72 hours remaining. External temperature, minus 24 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. Field communication log, day 3. Unclassified, system compromised. Major chase, emergency protocols. Cheyenne Mountain Complex, 0445 hours. The coffee tastes like metal. Everything tastes like metal now. I'm writing this because our standard logging protocols have been, what's the word? Irrelevant for the past 18 hours. The electromagnetic interference is frying our secure networks faster than Crow can reroute them. She's been awake for 36 hours straight, her fingers dancing over backup terminals that spark and die under her touch. Colonel Lane received his 4th set of contradictory orders at 0300. Stratcom wants us to maintain radio silence. Northcom demands continuous situation reports. Someone claiming to be acting Secretary of Defense ordered us to evacuate all personnel to surface installations. The problem is, there are no surface installations left to evacuate to. I've stopped asking Lane which orders we're following. He's stopped giving answers that make sense. The backup generators kicked in at 0230 when the main power grid experienced what Crow politely called a significant electrical event. Through the blast doors, we can hear them struggling against the load. The ventilation system keeps cycling off for 30-second intervals that leave us breathing our own exhales in the dark. Dr. Rain emerged from the meteorological center 2 hours ago with printouts that shouldn't exist. Weather data showing atmospheric conditions that violate basic physics. Temperature gradients dropping 70 degrees in vertical columns. Barometric pressure readings that would require the atmosphere to be twice as dense as it actually is. "The instruments are malfunctioning," Lane told him. "All of them?" Rain asked. "Simultaneously? In identical patterns?" Lane walked away. He's been walking away from a lot of conversations lately. The electromagnetic pulse effects are spreading. We've lost contact with NORAD installations in Alaska, Montana, and Wyoming. The pattern is too precise to be natural. Each facility goes dark exactly 47 minutes after reporting unusual atmospheric disturbances. We have 32 minutes left on our countdown. Crow discovered something that makes my teeth ache. She found Colonel Lane in the communication center at 0200, feeding transmission logs into the document shredder. Not just any logs, incoming messages from surviving civilian authorities, evacuation reports from major cities, casualty estimates from FEMA. "Security protocol," he said when she confronted him. "Who's security?" she asked. He didn't answer. He never answers anymore. The food situation is becoming academic. Base supply officer locked down all rations 12 hours ago on Lane's direct orders. Each person gets 1 MRE per day, distributed at 0800, 1200, and 1800. The problem is there were 217 personnel on base when this started. This morning's head count was 163. I don't know where the other 54 went. Nobody's talking about the other 54. The external sensors are painting a picture that my training never prepared me to process. Surface temperature, minus 47 degrees Fahrenheit. This is Colorado in September. Yesterday it was 72 degrees and sunny. The weather doesn't change like that. Weather doesn't change like that. But the radiation detectors are the real nightmare. Background radiation levels spiked to 50 times normal at 2,347 hours yesterday, then dropped to 0 at midnight exactly. Complete 0. That's not how radiation works. Radiation doesn't follow a schedule. Dr. Rain thinks the electromagnetic pulses aren't random. He's mapped the timing against astronomical data, military communication schedules, and something he calls atmospheric ionization windows. His calculations suggest the pulses are triggered by specific combinations of solar activity and artificial electromagnetic signatures. "Someone's controlling this," he said. "Who?" I asked. "Someone with access to military satellite networks and atmospheric modification technology." That's when I realized Dr. Rain knows more than he's been sharing. His security clearance level is listed as confidential on his base access badge, but he's been accessing databases that require secret clearance or higher. I checked. The system logs show him pulling files on Project Winterfall, Operation Climate Shield, and something called Atmospheric Defense Initiative, all programs that don't exist in any official capacity. I confronted him in the meteorological center while he was analyzing atmospheric composition data. Your clearance doesn't authorize access to those files, I said. My clearance is higher than my badge indicates, he replied without looking up from his screens. How much higher? High enough to know that this isn't an accident. The base personnel are showing symptoms I don't have names for. Dr. Martinez in the medical bay reports cases of severe electromagnetic sensitivity. People collapsing when they get within 10 feet of functioning electronics. Others are experiencing what she calls atmospheric pressure syndrome, nosebleeds, inner ear damage, and respiratory distress that correlates with barometric changes. But the worst part is the behavior changes. Military personnel trained in crisis response are acting like civilians in their first emergency. Panic responses, abandonment of protocol, hoarding behavior. Yesterday, I found Master Sergeant Williams hiding water bottles in an unused storage closet. Williams has 22 years of service and 3 combat deployments. He's not the hoarding type. It's the electromagnetic exposure, Dr. Martinez explained. It's affecting brain chemistry, triggering fight or flight responses even when there's no immediate threat. Is it permanent? I asked. I don't know. I've never seen exposure patterns like this. The external cameras are failing in sequence, but the last functional feeds showed something that Crow refuses to put in any official report. Mushroom clouds rising from the eastern horizon. Not 1 or 2 dozens. A line of them stretching from north to south like obscene flowers blooming against the sky. Nuclear detonations. Rain confirmed when I showed him the footage. Where? Denver. Colorado Springs. Pueblo. All major population and military centers along the Front Range. Enemy action? No, he said, and his voice carried a weight I didn't want to understand. Defensive action. That's when I stopped asking questions I wasn't prepared to hear answered. Colonel Lane called an all-hands briefing at 0400. 147 personnel assembled in the main conference center. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks, though this all started 3 days ago. As of 0330 hours, NORAD Command has lost contact with all surface installations, he announced. We are operating under DEFCON 1 protocols until further notice. What about civilian evacuation? Asked Lieutenant Torres from Medical. There are no civilians to evacuate, Lane replied. The silence that followed lasted exactly 43 seconds. I counted. Sir, Sergeant Crow spoke from the back of the room. Satellite communications are still functional. We could establish contact with. Negative, Lane cut her off. All external communications are suspended by direct order. Whose order? She pressed. Lane looked at her for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before in 20 years of military service. Fear. Not tactical concern or strategic uncertainty. Raw animal fear. Mine, he said. The briefing ended with Lane walking out while people were still asking questions. I followed him to his office and found him standing at his desk, staring at a single piece of paper covered in handwriting I didn't recognize. Colonel, we need to discuss. No, he said without looking up. We don't. Sir, with respect, the personnel need answers. The personnel need to survive the next 12 hours, he said. Answers won't help with that. He was right. The electromagnetic pulse hit us at 0432 hours, exactly 47 minutes after the unusual atmospheric disturbances began registering on our instruments. Every electronic system in the mountain went dark for 97 seconds. When the emergency lighting came back online, 17 more people were missing. I found Crow in the communication center, working by flashlight to restore our basic systems. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from electromagnetic exposure. The same tremor I've been developing in my left hand since yesterday. Major, she said without looking up from the equipment. I need to show you something. She led me to a terminal that shouldn't have been functional, but was displaying data streams from sources I couldn't identify. Satellite feeds, ground station reports, atmospheric monitoring data from locations across North America. I've been maintaining communication with other installations, she said. Unofficial channels. That violates Colonel Lane's direct orders. Colonel Lane's orders violate reality, she replied. Look at this. The data showed the electromagnetic pulses following a precise geographic pattern, moving from east to west at exactly 1,247 miles per hour. Each pulse preceded by atmospheric modifications that created perfect conditions for maximum electromagnetic amplification. The timing was too precise for natural phenomena, too coordinated for random enemy action. Someone's doing this deliberately, Crow said, and they have access to our defense networks. That's when I understood why Colonel Lane had been destroying incoming communications. He knew. Somehow, he knew what was happening and who was responsible. The contradictory orders, the information suppression, the personnel disappearances. He wasn't trying to maintain security. He was trying to maintain plausible deniability. The final satellite feed came through at 0511 hours. Crow and I watched the last functioning surveillance satellite capture images of the surface world we'd known 3 days ago. Cities dark. Interstate highways empty. No lights, no movement, no signs of organized human activity across a 1,000-mile radius. But in the distance, barely visible at the edge of the satellite's range, we could see something that made my training and experience feel inadequate. Geometric patterns of light in the sky, too regular to be natural, too large to be human-made. Patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose and capabilities that exceeded every assumption we'd been operating under. Nuclear winter isn't coming, Crow said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's already here, and someone invited it. The transmission ended with the satellite going dark. We're alone now, truly alone, with failing systems and questions that have no answers in any manual I've ever read. External temperature, -53 degrees Fahrenheit. Estimated time to complete system failure, 14 hours. Personnel remaining, 131. I'm going to find Colonel Lane and get the truth out of him, even if I have to break protocol to do it. Because protocol doesn't mean anything when the world ends in 3 days, and the people responsible are wearing the same uniform you are. End log, battery backup power at 12%. Major Alvara Chase, Communications Division. Cheyenne Mountain Complex. Day 3 of the end of everything we knew. Survivor log, Day 5. No classification, government structure collapsed. Alvara Chase, personal record. Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Colorado. External temperature, -40 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. The steel door to Colonel Lane's office wouldn't budge at first. Crow had to use the emergency override, something that should have triggered alarms throughout the facility. Nothing. The silence felt heavier than the reinforced concrete above our heads. We found him slumped over his desk, face blue-gray in the emergency lighting. The sealed office reeked of carbon monoxide. He'd jury-rigged a small heater to burn clean, then disabled the ventilation. Beside his body, a single sheet of paper with NORAD letterhead. Cannot comply with Directive 7739. Constitutional oath supersedes operational orders. God help us all. N. Lane, Colonel, USAF. I pocketed the note before Crow could read it fully. Some truths are too heavy for enlisted personnel. That was 6 hours ago. Since then, we've lost 12 more. The radiation sickness hit the surface teams first, the ones who'd volunteered for perimeter duty when our external sensors went dark. They came back talking about the sky, how it looked wrong, like someone had stretched black gauze across the heavens and set it smoldering. By evening, they were vomiting blood. By midnight, they were gone. Dr. Rain pulled me aside during the worst of it, when Sergeant Morrison was convulsing in the medical bay and we'd run out of morphine. Chase, we need to talk. Privately. His face had taken on that gray pallor I was seeing in too many others. The underground ventilation systems were working, but something was getting through. Something that made Geiger counters click like angry insects. We found a quiet corner in Sublevel 7, near the old Cold War archives. The emergency lighting cast harsh shadows that made his eye sockets look like cave mouths. Project Winterfall wasn't a weather control experiment, he said without preamble. It was atmospheric manipulation. Climate engineering on a continental scale. I'd suspected as much since day 2, but hearing it confirmed made my chest tighten. For what purpose? Defense. The theory was sound. If we could trigger localized nuclear winter effects, we could neutralize incoming ICBMs through atmospheric disruption. The electromagnetic pulse from detonation would be contained within the altered atmospheric layer. Theory, I repeated. The math worked. The computer models were flawless. His voice cracked. But we never accounted for cascade amplification. When the real nuclear detonations started, Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, our atmosphere was already primed. Instead of containing the effects, we amplified them. Through the facility's bones, I could feel the deep thrumming of our backup generators. We were down to emergency power, rationing fuel that should have lasted months. How many cities? I asked. Satellite data before we lost contact showed thermal signatures from 47 major population centers. He paused, studying his hands. That was day 3. The atmospheric particle density suggests the number has grown. 47 cities. Minimum. The math was simple and devastating. Millions dead in the initial strikes, tens of millions more from radiation, and now hundreds of millions facing nuclear winter. America, hell, maybe the world, had been gutted in less than a week. The atmospheric recovery timeline? 18 to 24 months. Minimum. That's assuming no additional detonations and optimal atmospheric cleansing conditions. He met my eyes. Chase, the external temperature has dropped 30 degrees in 5 days. At this rate, surface conditions will be uninhabitable within 2 weeks. I thought about our remaining 47 personnel. Food stores calculated for 200 people for 6 months meant maybe 4 months for our current numbers, if we maintained strict rationing. Heating fuel would last half that. There's something else, Rain continued. I've been monitoring long-range communications on restricted frequencies. There's a deep mountain installation in Utah, Dugway Mountain Complex. They're broadcasting survivor beacon signals every 12 hours. Why didn't you report this through chain of command? His laugh was bitter. What chain of command? Lane's dead. You're the highest-ranking officer left, and you're a major in communications. The federal government has been reduced to scattered bunkers and whoever can keep a radio working. The weight of accidental authority settled on my shoulders like lead blankets. 47 lives, maybe among the last few thousand Americans still breathing. The Utah facility is requesting atmospheric data, Rain said. They claim to have clean air surface access and agricultural capabilities. If we can get them Project Winterfall research data, they might accept survivors. Might. It's the only option that doesn't end with us all dying slowly in this mountain. I looked around the archive room, rows of filing cabinets containing decades of military secrets that would probably never matter again. Plans for wars that would never be fought, intelligence on enemies that might no longer exist. What do you need from me? Access to the Winterfall files. They're locked behind your security clearance now that Lane's gone. And, he hesitated, we need to tell the others. About the timeline. About Utah. Through the facility's ventilation system, I could hear the distant sound of someone crying. Probably Williams from the motor pool. His family had been stationed in Colorado Springs. By now, the Springs was a radioactive crater. Rain, how long have you been in contact with Utah? Something flickered in his expression. 3 days. 3 days. Since before we lost Lane. Since before you told me about the Cascade failure. Chase, you've been planning this conversation. Planning to use my clearance to access the data and trade it for passage to Utah. I kept my voice level. The question is, passage for all 47 of us, or just passage for you? He looked away, and I had my answer. Here's what's going to happen, Doctor. You're going to transfer all your atmospheric data to me immediately. You're going to provide me with the Utah facility coordinates and communication protocols. And you're going to do it before I inform the others that you've been secretly negotiating our survival behind closed doors. You don't understand the political complexities. I understand that you're a civilian contractor who's been playing games with military personnel's lives. I stepped closer. I also understand that without my clearance, you have nothing to trade to Utah. So we do this my way, or you can try explaining to Sergeant Crow why her friends died while you were making private deals. The generators throbbed deeper, and somewhere in the facility's depths, another life support alarm began its steady electronic wail. Rain reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper covered in coordinates and radio frequencies. The Utah facility has 12 hours of clean air daily, from 0600 to 1800 local time. They're accepting survivors in groups of 20 or less. Background checks required. Military personnel get priority. I took the paper. How many groups have they accepted? 14 so far. Approximately 200 survivors total. 200 people. In a country that had once held 330 million. Chase, Rain said quietly, I know how this looks, but I've been trying to save us. All of us. The Utah facility specifically requested the atmospheric data. They need it to predict weather patterns for surface agriculture. This isn't just about getting us out, it's about rebuilding. I folded the coordinates and slipped them into my jacket pocket. Outside, the mountain wind was howling, a sound I'd never heard before in a facility designed to withstand nuclear war. The storm systems were intensifying. Here's how we do this, Doctor. Tomorrow at 0800, we brief all personnel on the situation. Full disclosure, the atmospheric timeline, the casualty estimates, the Utah option. Everyone gets to vote on whether we attempt the journey or try to survive here. That's not tactically sound. Panic. These are American military personnel and citizens. They have a right to know what they're facing and a right to choose their own death if that's what it comes to. Through the facility intercom, Crow's voice crackled. Major Chase to communications immediately. We're receiving priority transmission on emergency frequency. I headed for the door, then paused. Rain, if I find out you've been holding back any other information about Utah, about Winterfall, about anything, I'll leave you here when we go. That's a promise. As I walked back through the facility corridors, past the medical bay where we'd stacked the bodies under tarps, past the mess hall where 47 people were trying to make canned rations last 4 months, I felt the weight of command settling deeper into my bones. In communications, Crow was hunched over the radio console, headphones pressed tight against her ears. She looked up as I entered, and her expression made my stomach drop. Major, it's Utah. They're broadcasting on open channels. She handed me the headphones. You need to hear this. The voice was distant, distorted by atmospheric interference, but clear enough. Dugway Mountain Complex to all surviving government installations. Facility compromised as of 1,400 hours. Repeat, Dugway Mountain Complex is compromised. External breach in Sector 7. Contamination spreading through life support systems. This is our final transmission. We are sealing facility permanently to prevent atmospheric contamination spread. Any survivors monitoring this frequency are advised that Dugway Mountain is no longer viable shelter. Seeking alternative. Static swallowed the transmission. I stared at the radio console, feeling our last hope dissolve like radiation in the wind. Crow was watching me, waiting for orders that I didn't know how to give. Ma'am, she said quietly, what do we tell the others? Through the facility's bones, I could feel the generators straining against the cold. 4 months of food, 2 months of fuel, 47 people in a mountain tomb, and nowhere left to run. I thought about Lane's final note, about constitutional oaths and impossible orders. We tell them the truth, Sergeant. We tell them we're on our own. External temperature, minus 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Facility population, 47. Estimated survival timeline, 8 to 10 weeks. Communication status, isolated. Personal log, week 2. Alvara Chase, Cheyenne Mountain. Written by hand, electronics failing. The ink freezes if I don't keep the pen warm between sentences. Never thought I'd miss the steady hum of computer fans, but the silence in the communications center feels like death itself. 47 of us left now. 47 out of 200. I've stopped thinking of myself as Major Chase. Rank means nothing when you're measuring diesel fuel in coffee cups and counting individual crackers for dinner rations. The gold oak leaves on my collar are just metal now, cold against my neck when I sleep in full uniform because it's too dangerous to undress. Body heat conservation trumps military appearance regulations. Sergeant Crow, Elvera, has become my right hand. Her technical skills are the only reason we still have lights and heat. She's rigged the backup generators to cycle on and off in 15-minute intervals, stretching our fuel supply. Smart. Smarter than the brass ever gave her credit for. Major, she said yesterday, still using my rank despite everything. Old habits. The heating system's pulling too much power. We need to seal off sections of the base. I nodded, knowing what that meant. We'd be condensing our living space again. 47 people crammed into what used to be the Emergency Operations Center. The smell of unwashed bodies and fierce sweat has become our new normal. Dr. Rain sits in the corner with his weather data, scribbling calculations on paper torn from technical manuals. His fingers are black with frostbite, but he keeps writing. Obsessive. When I asked him yesterday about recovery timelines, he looked up with eyes that had seen too much mathematics. 18 months minimum, he said. The particulate matter in the upper atmosphere. It's not dispersing as projected. The nuclear winter effects are compounding. 18 months. We have supplies for maybe 3 if we're careful. If we're lucky. If nobody else dies from radiation sickness. The Geiger counter clicks like a metronome in the corner. Background radiation levels still climbing. Every day, someone new shows the early symptoms: nausea, fatigue, that gray pallor that means your bone marrow is shutting down. We've moved the sick to the medical bay, but Dr. Patterson died on day 9. So now it's just Corporal Martinez with his field medic training, trying to keep people comfortable. Martinez pulled me aside this morning. "Major, we need to talk about morphine rationing." I knew what he meant. End-of-life care. We're military, we understand battlefield triage. But this isn't a battlefield. This is just ending. The civilians are having a harder time with resource allocation. Yesterday, one of the contractor engineers, Stevens, I think, tried to hoard extra rations. Found them stashed in his bunk. The group wanted to throw him outside, let the radiation cook him. I had to make a command decision. We don't execute people for being scared, I told them. But privately, I understood the anger. When your daughter is down to half rations and some asshole is hiding crackers, civilization becomes a very thin veneer. Elvira has been working on the communication array, trying to reach other facilities. So far, nothing but static and the occasional automated distress beacon from installations that stopped responding days ago. But she's persistent. Technical problems have solutions, unlike the bigger nightmare we're living. "I'm picking up something," she said 3 hours ago, adjusting the antenna alignment manually since the electronic controls failed. Not voice traffic, but patterns. Like data transmission. From where? That's the thing, Major. The signal's coming from below us. Deep underground. Dr. Rain looked up from his calculations. There are classified facilities beneath this installation. Deeper bunkers. I've seen references in the meteorological data sharing protocols. What kind of references? He hesitated. That pause that means you're about to learn something that changes everything. Emergency relocation sites for essential government personnel. Nuclear hardened. Independent life support systems. He set down his pen. I've been receiving data requests from one of them. Atmospheric readings, radiation measurements. They've been monitoring our situation. The cold in the room suddenly felt different. Not just environmental. Personal. They know we're here, I said. They know we're dying, Rain corrected. Elvira stood up, her breath visible in the frigid air. The signal includes coordinates. Geographic markers. They're inviting us down. 47 people. 3 weeks of fuel remaining. Surface radiation levels that would kill us in hours without protective equipment we don't have. And somewhere below us, people with working heat and adequate supplies have been watching us struggle. I made the command decision. How deep? The coordinates suggest about 2,000 feet below our current level. There's an access tunnel system, but Rain pulled out a hand-drawn schematic. The route passes through sections of the mountain that may have been compromised by seismic activity from the nuclear detonations. Radiation levels in the tunnels? Unknown. The deeper bunker would be shielded, but the access routes. He shrugged. We'd be gambling. I looked around the room at 46 faces watching me. Waiting for leadership. Military protocol says you don't risk the mission for uncertain gains. But there is no mission anymore. There's just survival. Sergeant Crow, can you establish reliable communication with this deeper facility? I can try, Major. The signal's intermittent, but if they're actively monitoring our transmissions. Do it. She nodded and turned back to the communication equipment. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the cold, adjusting frequencies and transmission power. Static filled the air, then patterns, then something that might have been a human voice buried in electronic interference. Then, clear as a bell. Cheyenne Mountain survivors, this is Deep Mountain installation. We copy your situation. Facility status, operational. Life support, adequate for additional personnel. Access route, hazardous but manageable with proper equipment. Advise when ready for relocation protocol. 47 people held their breath. Outside, the nuclear winter was killing everything that had ever lived on the surface. Below us, people with warm rooms and working computers were offering salvation. Deep Mountain installation, this is Major Alvaro Chase, Acting Commander Cheyenne Mountain survivors. Request immediate relocation protocol information. We have critical atmospheric data and 47 personnel requiring emergency shelter. Major Chase, understood. Stand by for equipment manifest and route guidance. Be advised, relocation must commence within 72 hours. Surface conditions deteriorating beyond acceptable parameters for transit. I looked at the fuel gauge on our backup generator. 68 hours of power remaining, maybe less if the cold snap continues. The timing wasn't coincidental. They'd been waiting for us to get desperate enough to risk the journey. Elvira, I said quietly, can we trust them? She was already writing down equipment specifications coming through the radio. Major, we're 47 people slowly freezing to death in a dying facility. Trust isn't really the question anymore. She was right. The question was whether we died here in 3 days when the power failed, or died trying to reach people who had heat and food and the resources to survive 18 months of nuclear winter. I keyed the radio. Deep mountain installation. We accept relocation protocol. Transmit full guidance. As the technical instructions began flowing through our speakers, I realized I was making the same choice Air Force One's pilot had made weeks ago. Broadcasting into the unknown, hoping someone with answers was listening. The difference was this time someone answered back. Outside, the wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying radioactive snow that would never melt in our lifetimes. Inside, 47 people began preparing for a journey into the depths of the earth, following the voice of strangers who might be our salvation, or might be something else entirely. The Geiger counter kept clicking its steady rhythm, counting down the seconds of our old life, marking time until we descended into whatever was waiting below. Personal record, week 3. A chase. Emergency lighting only, backup power at 12%. The smell hits you first down here. Not the antiseptic military cleanliness we maintained for the first 2 weeks, but something organic and wrong. Decay masked by recycled air that can't quite filter out the truth. We're dying by degrees. I'm writing this by the amber glow of emergency lighting, because the main power grid failed 6 hours ago. Crow managed to get backup systems online, but she estimates we have maybe 4 days before even that dies. The silence where our electronics used to hum feels like holding your breath underwater. 12 more gone yesterday. The surface expedition was my call. Lieutenant Morrison volunteered to lead it, said his radiation training made him the logical choice. I should have known better. Should have recognized the fever in his eyes, the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking. Radiation sickness does things to your judgment, makes risks seem reasonable. They made it maybe 200 meters from the blast doors before the Geiger counter readings spiked beyond measurement. Morrison's final transmission was just static and screaming. Through the perimeter cameras, we watched them collapse in the snow that isn't really snow anymore. It's ash and fallout and ice crystals that glow faintly green in the dark. Dr. Rain called it atmospheric particulate precipitation. Even now, with everything falling apart, he can't just say radioactive snow. But that's not why I'm writing this. Not really. I caught him 3 hours ago in the communications bay, hunched over equipment that should have been dead since the main power failure. Somehow he'd rigged a bypass from the backup systems, jury-rigged a transmission array that was pulling precious power from our life support. The display screen showed coordinates, longitude and latitude for something called deep mountain installation. How long? I asked. He didn't even look up, just kept typing with fingers that moved too quickly, too precisely for someone suffering from radiation exposure. How long what, Major? How long have you been in contact with them? His fingers stopped. In the emergency lighting, his face looked cadaverous, all sharp angles and deep shadows. Since day one. The words hit me like a physical blow. While we'd been rationing food, while Morrison and his team died in that radioactive wasteland outside, while I'd been making impossible decisions about who gets the last of the medical supplies, Rain had been holding back the one thing that could save us all. You son of a bitch. They wanted the weather data first, he said, still not meeting my eyes. Complete atmospheric readings, radiation dispersion patterns, recovery timeline projections. I needed time to compile everything. People are dying. People are dying everywhere, Major. At least this way, some of the data survives. Some of the knowledge gets preserved. I should have shot him then. My sidearm was loaded, safety off. In the old military justice system, what he'd done would have been treason during wartime. But we don't have a military justice system anymore. We don't have a military. We have 23 people in a concrete tomb, and one of them has been playing chess while the rest of us fought for our lives. The coordinates? I asked. Underground facility. Pre-war construction, independent power grid, full life support for 500 personnel. They've been monitoring our situation, waiting for confirmation that we had valuable intelligence to trade. Trade? For the first time, He looked at me directly. His eyes were bloodshot, but there was something else there, something cold and calculating that had nothing to do with radiation sickness. Passage to the facility. Food, medical supplies, clean air. In exchange for 3 years of atmospheric data and our expertise in weather modification technology. Our expertise? My expertise, Major. Project Winterfall was my design. The confession hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Everything clicked into place: his security clearance, his presence at NORAD, his knowledge of atmospheric manipulation systems that should have been classified beyond his level. He hadn't been a civilian contractor brought in to monitor the weather. He'd been one of the architects of the system that killed the world. "You knew," I whispered. "When the first reports came in, when Air Force One went down, you knew what was happening because you helped build it." The project was supposed to be defensive. Localized weather modification to disrupt enemy communications, create strategic advantages in battlefield conditions. We never intended. Bullshit. The word came out harsher than I intended, echoing off the concrete walls. You knew exactly what would happen when you triggered a system designed to modify atmospheric conditions on a continental scale. The foreign attack accelerated the timeline. We had to activate the system before it was fully tested, before we understood the cascade effects. The nuclear winter wasn't supposed to be permanent. How long? Best case scenario, 18 months before atmospheric recovery begins. Worst case. He trailed off, but I could see the answer in his face. How long, Rain? 5 years. Maybe more. 5 years. The number settled in my chest like a weight. 5 years of underground survival, of rationing resources, of watching people die from radiation exposure and cabin fever, and the slow psychological breakdown that comes from living in a concrete box while the world ends outside. The facility can sustain us, he continued. Full medical treatment, decontamination protocols, agricultural systems for food production. But they need the data to understand what we're dealing with, how to plan for recovery. And you were going to tell us when. I was going to leave tonight, take the data, make contact with the facility, negotiate for the rest of you once I was safely inside. The casual admission of his planned betrayal was almost worse than the original deception. He'd been prepared to abandon 22 people to certain death while he traded our collective suffering for his personal salvation. I heard footsteps in the corridor, boots on concrete, the measured pace of someone trying not to make noise. Crow appeared in the doorway, her engineer's toolkit in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "Major, I've been looking for you. The water filtration system is showing pressure drops, and I need to." She stopped, taking in the scene. The emergency lighting casting strange shadows. Rain hunched over his makeshift communication array, me standing with my hand on my sidearm. "What's going on?" "Dr. Rain was just explaining his evacuation plans," I said. "Personal evacuation plans." Crow's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something harder. She'd been the one maintaining our life support systems, calculating ratios of food to people, managing our dwindling resources with the precision of someone who understood that every calorie mattered. She'd been making miracles happen with duct tape and prayer while Rain planned his escape. "The coordinates," she said. It wasn't a question. Rain nodded toward the display. "Deep mountain installation. 47 miles northeast, accessible by surface route if we can get radiation suits and..." "We?" Crow's voice was flat. "As in all of us? The facility has limited space. They're prioritizing personnel with essential technical knowledge. Meaning you. Meaning the people who can contribute to recovery efforts. Scientists, engineers, military personnel with relevant experience." I felt something snap inside me. The careful control I'd maintained for 3 weeks, the leadership facade I'd worn while making impossible decisions, the thin veneer of military discipline that had held our group together. It all cracked at once. "You mean the people you deem worthy of survival?" "I mean the people who have the best chance of rebuilding civilization." "Whose civilization?" Crow stepped forward, and I could see her engineer's mind working through the logistics. "This facility, how many people are already there?" "Current population is 143. Pre-selected?" Rain hesitated. "Government personnel, military command staff, essential scientists. Key figures for continuity of leadership." "And their families?" Another hesitation. Space constraints required difficult choices. I understood then. While we'd been dying in our concrete tomb, while millions of people across the continent had been choking on radioactive ash, A select group of government officials and scientists had been living in comfort in their underground bunker. They'd watched the world end from behind closed doors, making lists of who deserved to survive and who could be left to die. How many requests for rescue have they denied? I asked. I don't have access to. How many, Rain? 47 installations have made contact. Resources are limited. Difficult choices. How many people? His voice dropped to a whisper. Approximately 1,500. 1,500 people. 1,500 survivors who'd made contact with the facility, who'd asked for help, who'd been told that their lives weren't valuable enough to risk rescue operations. People like us, military personnel, and civilians and scientists who'd been deemed non-essential to the grand project of rebuilding America. Crow's flashlight beam swept across the communication array, illuminating banks of equipment that represented weeks of careful power management and resource allocation. Equipment that Rain had secretly activated, drawing power from our life support systems to maintain contact with people who saw us as expendable. The medical supplies, she said suddenly. The insulin we've been rationing for Davidson. The antibiotics for the radiation exposure symptoms. You've been keeping extra supplies. It wasn't a question, but Rain nodded anyway. Personal emergency reserves. Standard protocol for what? For keeping yourself healthy enough to make the journey? While the rest of us get sicker and weaker and more desperate? I thought about Davidson, the mess hall cook who'd been carefully measuring his insulin doses, skipping meals to make his supplies last longer. About Morrison and his team, who died trying to find medical supplies because we'd told them we didn't have enough to treat everyone. About the 12 people who died yesterday, people who might have lived if we'd had access to proper medical care. There's enough medicine for the surface journey, Rain said. Enough for whoever makes the trip to the facility. Whoever you choose to take with you. Whoever has the best chance of survival. The calculation was cold and simple. Rain had been planning to select the healthiest, most useful members of our group to accompany him on the journey. The rest would be left behind with minimal resources, essentially condemned to die while the chosen few traded our collective data for their personal salvation. The weather data, I said. What happens to it if we don't cooperate? The facility has their own atmospheric monitoring systems. The data would be valuable, but not essential. But our survival depends on it. Your survival depends on reaching the facility, with or without the data. I saw the trap then. Without the data, we were just refugees, expendable people asking for charity from the underground government. With the data, we became valuable assets worth the cost of rescue. But Rain controlled the data, and he'd been planning to use it as his personal insurance policy. Change of plans, I said. We're all going together. The journey is dangerous. Radiation exposure, equipment failure, weather conditions. Not everyone will make it. Then not everyone makes it. But we don't leave people behind to die. That's not practical. I don't give a damn about practical. I drew my sidearm, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon in my hand. I give a damn about the people under my command. Rain stared at the gun for a long moment, then at my face. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. I'll need 6 hours to prepare the data transmission. Package everything into portable storage units. You'll need 6 hours to teach Crow how to access and transmit the data herself. I'm the only one who understands the atmospheric modeling systems. Then you better start teaching fast. Crow stepped forward, her engineer's toolkit already open. Start with the basic data structure. I'll figure out the rest. As they began working, I found myself thinking about Morrison and his team, about the choice I'd made to let them attempt the surface expedition, about all the choices I'd made over the past 3 weeks, all the times I'd had to decide who lived and who died based on incomplete information and impossible circumstances. Leadership in the old world had been about following protocols, maintaining chain of command, executing orders from higher authority. Leadership in this new world was about making moral choices in the absence of any external authority, about deciding what kind of person you wanted to be when nobody was watching except the people who depended on you. I thought about the facility, about the government officials and scientists who'd survived the nuclear winter in their underground bunker, about the lists they'd made of who deserved to live and who could be left to die, about the civilization they were planning to rebuild and whether it would be worth rebuilding. 23 people. That's what we had left. 23 people who'd survived 3 weeks in hell, who'd shared resources and supported each other, and maintained something resembling humanity while the world ended around us. Maybe that was worth preserving. Maybe that was the real foundation for whatever came next. The emergency lighting flickered, and I heard the distant hum of failing life support systems. 4 days of backup power left, and 47 miles of radioactive wasteland between us and safety. But at least we'd face it together. At least we'd face it with the truth. Personal note, handwritten. If we don't make it, if someone finds this record after we're gone, know this: we tried to do the right thing. We tried to save everyone. In a world where survival meant making impossible choices, we chose to remain human. That has to count for something. That has to be enough. End of transmission. Final report, week 4. Alvaro Chase, former major. Recording on battery backup, 47% remaining. Cheyenne Mountain Complex, deep level 7. The emergency lighting casts everything in hellish red shadows. 23 of us left now. 23 souls in a tomb that was supposed to protect America's nuclear deterrent, reduced to scavenging for battery packs and arguing over the last cans of peaches. I'm not writing this as a military report anymore. There's no chain of command to report to, no country to serve, just people trying to survive in a world that's been murdered by its own guardians. But I found something today, something that changes everything. Dr. Rain thought he was clever, hiding his portable drive in the medical bay's biohazard container. Nobody goes near that thing unless they're disposing of contaminated waste. Which, let's be honest, is what most of us are becoming anyway. The radiation counters don't lie. We're all walking dead, just on different timelines. But I needed medical supplies for Jenkins. Poor bastard's been vomiting blood for 3 days, and I knew Rain had been hoarding the anti-radiation medication. When I cracked open that container, I found more than just his hidden stash of potassium iodide. I found the truth. The portable drive still had enough juice for one data dump. Government-grade encryption, but I still remember my intelligence training. Still remember the back doors they built into every system because they never trusted anyone completely, not even themselves. Project Winterfall wasn't what Rain told us. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't some weather modification experiment gone wrong. It was our doomsday protocol. The files date back 18 months. Satellite intelligence showing massive atmospheric manipulation equipment being constructed across the Siberian tundra. The Russians had been seeding the upper atmosphere with reflective particles for months, preparing to trigger an artificial nuclear winter that would devastate North American agriculture while leaving their own territory relatively unaffected. We knew. We fucking knew. So we built our own system. Project Winterfall, a rapid atmospheric deployment network designed to counter their weather weapon by accelerating the nuclear winter effect globally. Mutually assured climatic destruction. If they were going to freeze us out, we'd freeze everyone. The trigger mechanism was simple. Any attack on American soil that disabled our communication networks would automatically activate Winterfall. No human authorization required. No presidential approval. Just pure, automated revenge. The Chinese submarine launched its electromagnetic pulse missiles at 0347 hours on day 0. The same EMP that killed our communications network. The same EMP that made it impossible for Air Force One to complete its final warning. Nuclear winter coming wasn't a prediction. It was a promise. Our own weather modification system activated automatically, pumping gigatons of reflective particles into the atmosphere. We turned the planet into a frozen wasteland to spite our enemies, and now we're all dying together in the dark. The files show atmospheric recovery projections. Best case scenario, 18 months of nuclear winter conditions, followed by gradual warming over the next decade. Worst case, we've triggered a permanent climate shift that will take centuries to reverse. Average global temperature has dropped 47 degrees Fahrenheit in 4 weeks. I've been thinking about Jenkins, puking blood in the medical bay. About Sergeant Reeves, who we found frozen solid in the ventilation system yesterday. About the families we left behind on the surface, probably dead in the first week. All of this could have been prevented. One phone call, one diplomatic solution, one moment of sanity in a world gone mad with fear and pride. Instead, we chose the nuclear option. Literally. But there's something else in these files. Something that changes everything again. Buried in the technical specifications, hidden in the atmospheric modeling data, I found communication logs from other installations. Not just NORAD. Not just American facilities. The Australians are alive. Their Woomera installation is fully operational, with over 800 personnel. The Norwegians maintained contact with their Svalbard facility until 3 days ago. The Japanese have multiple underground installations throughout their mountain regions. We're not alone. More importantly, there's a pattern in the atmospheric data that Rain either didn't understand or didn't want to share. The reflective particles aren't distributed evenly. There are gaps, corridors of relatively clear atmosphere that shift based on high-altitude wind patterns. These corridors could allow limited surface travel. Not safe, but possible. And according to the meteorological projections, one of these corridors will pass directly over our position in approximately 72 hours. It's our window. Maybe our only window. I've made my decision. Tomorrow, I'm telling the group everything. No more secrets. No more hoarding information while people die. They deserve to know the truth about what we did to this world. More importantly, they deserve to know about the underground facility 93 miles southeast of here. Deep Mountain Installation, a bunker complex that's been operating independently since the crisis began, with full life support and communication capabilities. Rain's been in contact with them for weeks. The coward was planning to make the journey alone, trading his weather data for sanctuary. But we're all going together, or none of us are going at all. The radiation suits are failing. The Geiger counters are screaming every time we venture near the surface access points. The facility's main power grid will fail within the week. But we have 72 hours to prepare. 72 hours to gather what we can carry. 72 hours to decide who we really are when everything we've ever known is stripped away. I'm not Major Alvaro Chase anymore. I'm not a NORAD communications officer. I'm not a servant of a government that no longer exists. I'm a human being who helped end the world, and now I'm going to do everything in my power to help rebuild it. The battery indicator is flashing red. 5% remaining. Just enough power for one more entry. If anyone finds this record, know that we tried. We tried to maintain order. We tried to follow protocol. We tried to serve something greater than ourselves. We failed, but we're not done yet. Crow figured out how to boost the communication array using the facility's emergency power grid. Tomorrow, we're going to attempt contact with every survivor installation on the planet. We're going to coordinate. We're going to share resources. We're going to stop thinking like separate nations and start thinking like a single species trying to survive. The old world is dead. The new world starts with us. Battery depleted, recording terminated. Final transmission sent to all survivor networks. Automated timestamp. Day 28, hour 23:47. Signal strength degraded. Message begins. This is Alvaro Chase, former communications officer, Cheyenne Mountain Complex. If you're receiving this transmission, you're not alone. We're coming to find you. We're coming to build something better from the ashes of what we destroyed. The nuclear winter was our doing. All of ours. Every nation that chose fear over hope, revenge over forgiveness, pride over survival. But we're still here. Still breathing. Still fighting. And that has to count for something. Signal lost. Surface expedition log, week 5. A Chase mobile recording. Battery dying, voice recognition software failing. The Geiger counter's clicking has become white noise. 23 of us left the mountain yesterday. I'm recording this with numb fingers inside radiation gloves that feel like oven mitts. The LED display on my dosimeter stopped working an hour ago, but the needle's buried so deep in the red zone it doesn't matter anymore. Cale Stone died at 0347 hours. Radiation sickness, same as the others. We left his body beside the highway marker for mile 127. Couldn't spare the energy to dig in frozen ground that rings like metal when you hit it with a shovel. The nuclear winter has teeth now. Temperature dropped to minus 62 Fahrenheit, according to Crow's last transmission from the mountain. That was 6 hours ago. Haven't heard from her since. The communication beacon she's maintaining is the only reason we're still moving in the right direction. When the snow lets up enough to see the signal light, it's a pinprick of orange in a world gone white and dead. Dr. Rain's weather data was wrong about the radiation levels. Everything was wrong. The atmospheric models didn't account for how the particles would settle, how they'd concentrate in valleys, how the wind patterns would shift. We're walking through a graveyard of physics, where the rules we thought we understood have been rewritten by splitting atoms. Sergeant Crow volunteered to stay behind. Someone needs to keep the beacon running, she said, but we all knew the real reason. Her radiation suit had a tear in the left shoulder seam. She'd been breathing contaminated air for 12 hours. The mission needed every functioning suit for the civilians. I should have ordered her to come. Should have found another way. But command decisions in the new world aren't about what's right. they're about what's possible. And possibilities are shrinking by the hour. The landscape doesn't look like Earth anymore. Snow falls upwards sometimes, caught in thermal drafts from the radiation-heated ground. Trees stand like black fingers, their bark peeled away by the initial blast wave 5 weeks ago. Their wood slowly crumbling into radioactive ash. The highway we're following disappears and reappears under drifts that shift like living things. 18 survivors left now. Lost 2 more to hypothermia when their heating packs failed. The military-grade equipment was designed for Arctic conditions, not for this. Not for an environment where the air itself burns your lungs and the ground glows faintly green through the snow. My hands are shaking. Not from cold. From the knowledge that we're probably walking toward nothing. The coordinates Rain transmitted before his accident point to a facility that might be compromised, might be empty, might be another lie in a world built on them. But it's the only hope we have, and hope is a luxury we can't afford to examine too closely. The civilians are holding up better than expected. Elvira Crow trained them well before we lost communication with the mountain. They move in formation, share body heat, don't waste energy on conversation. Military discipline without the military, just human stubbornness refusing to die quietly. At 1,200 hours, we found the first sign of other survivors. Footprints in the snow, partially filled but recent. Maybe 6 hours old. Boot prints, military standard issue. Someone else is walking this dead highway, someone with working equipment and enough strength to maintain proper spacing. Following the prints led us to an overturned transport truck, its cargo bay doors hanging open like broken wings. Inside we found supplies, medical kits, water purification tablets, emergency rations. All expired, but in this world, expiration dates are suggestions. The supplies had been organized, sorted, some taken, some left. Whoever was here knew what they were doing. There was a note carved into the truck's metal wall with a knife. Deep Mountain Installation, 15 miles north, government personnel only. Below it, in different handwriting, alive equals government personnel. The coordinates match Rain's transmission. Someone made it this far and left breadcrumbs. Someone with enough optimism to believe other survivors would follow. We pressed north. The wind carries sounds now, not natural sounds, but electronic ones. Radio static, the distant hum of generators, the rhythmic beeping of automated systems. Civilization's death rattle, but still breathing. At 1,500 hours, Peterson collapsed. 63 years old, civilian meteorologist from the university contracts. His radiation badge had turned black 2 hours ago. I made the call, morphine from the medical kit, all of it. He died quietly, painlessly, while the wind covered his last words. 17 survivors. The facility should be close now. Crow's Beacon is directly behind us, a steady pulse that's kept us oriented for 36 hours. If her equipment fails, if the power runs out, if she... No. Focus on the mission. Focus on the 17 people still breathing, still walking, still believing that tomorrow might be different from today. My radio crackled at 1,630 hours. Not Crow's frequency, something else. A voice, distorted by static and distance. Identify yourselves, facility security. Approach from the south road only, automated defenses active. I keyed the microphone with fingers that barely work anymore. This is Major Alvara Chase, United States Air Force, NORAD Communications Division. I have 17 survivors, military and civilian, requesting immediate shelter and medical assistance. The response came back stronger, clearer. Major Chase, your identification code is recognized. Follow the road markers to the main entrance. Medical teams standing by. Welcome to Deep Mountain Installation. The road markers were there, small reflective posts driven into the ground, invisible until you were close enough to touch them. A path through the wasteland, leading to a cluster of buildings built into the mountainside. Camouflaged, hardened, designed to survive exactly what we've been through. The main entrance was a blast door 20 feet wide, built into solid rock. Security cameras tracked our approach. Floodlights activated, nearly blinding after weeks of gray twilight. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like salvation. A man in clean fatigues waited inside, medical kit in hand. Behind him, more people, technicians, officers, civilians. All alive, all clean, all looking at us like we'd risen from the dead. Major Chase, the man said. I'm Colonel James Mitchell, facility commander. Let's get your people inside. We have decontamination procedures to follow, medical treatment to administer. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign, like something from a dead language. As we stumbled into the facility's warm, recycled air, I looked back at the wasteland we'd crossed. Somewhere out there, Sergeant Crow was still maintaining her beacon, still guiding other survivors toward hope. Her sacrifice had meaning now. Her choice had purpose. The blast door sealed behind us. The sound was final, absolute, the end of one world, the beginning of whatever comes next. Deep Mountain Installations' automated systems recognized my military credentials. The computers still functioned, still maintained their databases, still believed in chain of command and proper protocols. In a world where nothing worked, where everything had failed, the machines remembered who we used to be. 17 survivors from Cheyenne Mountain. 237 survivors already here. A skeleton crew of America's government, military, and scientific personnel, waiting in the deep places for the surface world to become habitable again. The nuclear winter isn't over. Won't be over for months, maybe years. But we endured the crossing. We survived the worst of it. And now, surrounded by clean air and electric lights and the quiet hum of machinery that works, I can almost believe that survival is possible. Almost believe that this isn't just a longer way to die. End of mobile recording. Transferring to facility systems. Major Alvara Chase. Deep Mountain Installation. Day 1 of Phase 2. Underground Facility Log, Month 2. Communications Officer A. Chase. Deep Mountain Installation, Facility Designation, Raven's Nest. Digital recording, power stable. The fluorescent lights don't flicker down here. After weeks of dying batteries and emergency lighting, the steady white glow feels almost alien. I've been Communications Officer Alvara Chase for exactly 63 days now. Not Major anymore, since there's no real Air Force left to promote anyone. The skeleton government that runs this place has different priorities than rank structure. 214 souls survived in Raven's Nest when we stumbled through those blast doors. Government personnel, military contractors, a handful of civilian specialists who happened to be in the right bunker when the world ended above us. Dr. Kalen Rain's weather data proved more valuable than gold. Turns out atmospheric recovery projections were exactly what the interim leadership needed to plan whatever comes next. I'm recording this from what used to be the Deputy Secretary of Defense's office. The nameplate still reads Richardson, but Richardson didn't make it past the first week of radiation sickness. Now it's mine, along with the responsibility of coordinating communications between survivor communities across what's left of North America. The static has mostly cleared from the long-range equipment. We've established contact with installations in Montana, Nevada, and surprisingly, a civilian group in the Toronto subway system. The Canadians organized faster than anyone expected. Their emergency broadcast system never fully collapsed. They're reporting the same timeline Rain predicted: 18 months of nuclear winter, then a slow crawl back to agricultural viability. International communications came back online yesterday. The European Union consolidated into 3 regional governments. China went dark completely after the second week. No signals, no responses, nothing. Russia's transmitting from somewhere in Siberia, but they're not sharing information about their situation. India and Australia are coordinating joint recovery efforts across the Pacific. The world map looks nothing like it did 2 months ago. I think about Sergeant Alvara Crow every time I power up the communication array. She stayed behind at Cheyenne Mountain, maintaining that beacon signal for the other NORAD survivor groups. Her sacrifice guided 47 more people to safety. They arrived 3 days after we did, half dead from radiation exposure, but alive because Crow kept transmitting coordinates until her equipment failed. The facility's medical officer said she would have known the radiation levels were lethal when she made that choice. Military discipline, he called it. I call it heroism that saved lives when I couldn't make the hard calls fast enough. We've established protocols for surface reconnaissance now. The radiation suits from Raven's Nest are military grade, designed for exactly this scenario. Small teams venture up through the access tunnels every few days, collecting atmospheric data and searching for other survivors. The temperature outside has stabilized at -42 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky is the color of old concrete, and snow falls constantly. Not real snow, but radioactive ash that looks like snow until you test it with the dosimeter. 3 weeks ago, a reconnaissance team found something that changed everything. A family of 4 living in a reinforced basement in Colorado Springs, 30 miles from the facility. They'd survived on canned food and collected rainwater, improvising radiation shielding from lead car batteries. The father was a nuclear engineer. He understood enough about fallout to keep them alive. That discovery shifted our entire mission. We're not just maintaining government continuity anymore. We're actively searching for survivors and establishing supply networks. The Basement family had been in radio contact with 17 other groups scattered across the Colorado-Wyoming region. Suddenly, our population calculations doubled. The new protocols are written in blood and radiation burns. Every surface mission requires unanimous approval from the 3-person emergency council. Every survivor contact gets verified through multiple communication methods before we risk personnel on rescue operations. Every resource allocation decision considers the 18-month timeline. We can't save everyone, but we can save enough to rebuild. I've become the voice of what we're calling the New America Emergency Government. It's probably grandiose for 200 people in a mountain bunker, but the interim president, former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Reeves, insists on maintaining constitutional continuity. She swore me in as communications director last week. The ceremony lasted 3 minutes and took place in the facility's mess hall, but she said it mattered for morale. My daily broadcasts reach 47 confirmed survivor communities now. Some are government facilities like ours, others are improvised civilian shelters. A few are military units that went underground when the chain of command collapsed. I tell them about atmospheric recovery projections, coordinate resource sharing, and relay medical information from our facility's doctors. But mostly, I tell them they're not alone. This is the voice of America. Facility designation Raven's Nest. Communications Officer Alvara Chase reporting. Today marks 65 days since the nuclear winter event began. Atmospheric radiation levels continue to decline in the southern regions. Texas and Florida reconnaissance teams report 40% improvement from peak readings. I pause the recording. Through the facility's internal speakers, I can hear the evening shift change. Footsteps in corridors, muffled conversations, the hum of life support systems that never stop running. This place has become more than a survival shelter. It's becoming a community. People are forming relationships, making plans that extend beyond mere survival. Someone started a weekly poker game. The facility's librarian organized a book club. Yesterday, Dr. Rain approached me with projections for spring surface agriculture. He thinks we can establish greenhouse operations within 6 months, using the facility's geothermal systems to power growing lights. The psychological impact of fresh food, of creating something instead of just consuming stored resources, could be as important as the nutritional benefits. But the most significant development came 3 days ago, when our radio operators intercepted a transmission from the International Space Station. 2 astronauts are still alive up there, monitoring global atmospheric conditions and coordinating information between the surviving ground installations. They've got a bird's-eye view of recovery patterns, and their data confirms what we hoped. The southern hemisphere is recovering faster. Australia and Argentina could be growing food again within a year. I finish the daily broadcast and lean back in the borrowed chair. The office feels strange, too big for one person, too small for the responsibility it represents. On the desk, I keep a photo that Crow gave me during our last week at Cheyenne Mountain. It shows our communications team during a routine training exercise, everyone smiling and completely unaware that the world would end 3 weeks later. The facility's intercom crackles to life. Communications, this is Watch Commander. We've got an incoming transmission from the Denver Metro Survivor Network. They're reporting contact with a group claiming to be from the CDC. I grab the headset and switch to the primary communication frequency. If there are CDC survivors with medical expertise and disease prevention protocols, that changes our planning for the next phase. As the signal comes through, I recognize the voice. It's one of the civilian contractors who disappeared during the initial chaos at NORAD. He's alive, leading a group of 40 survivors in the underground tunnels beneath Denver International Airport. Raven's Nest, this is Denver Metro Underground. We've established a sustainable shelter network, and we're ready to coordinate supply distribution. Our medical officer says we can start planning for surface operations within 90 days if the radiation decline continues. I key the microphone, and for the first time in 2 months, my voice carries genuine hope instead of just determination. Denver Metro Underground, this is Communications Officer Chase at Raven's Nest. Your timing is perfect. We're coordinating a multi-site spring preparation conference for next week. Stand by for encrypted frequency assignments and conference protocols. The nuclear winter isn't over. The radiation levels are still lethal in most areas. The global death toll is estimated at 90% of the pre-event population. The United States government exists only in scattered bunkers and underground facilities. Most of the world's major cities are uninhabitable ruins. But tonight, I'm coordinating supply sharing between survivor communities from Texas to Montana. Tomorrow, I'll brief the interim president on agricultural planning for post-winter food production. Next week, I'll participate in the first International Survivor Coordination Conference, linking installations across 4 continents. We survived the immediate catastrophe. We're adapting to the new reality. And slowly, carefully, we're building something that might become civilization again. I end today's log the same way I've ended every communication for the past month. This is the voice of America. We endure. We rebuild. We remember. Raven's Nest, signing off. The transmission indicator goes dark, but the equipment stays powered. Tomorrow, there will be more voices on the frequency, more survivors making contact, more communities joining the network, more signs that humanity will outlast the nuclear winter. In the depths of a mountain bunker, surrounded by recycled air and artificial light, that's enough hope to carry us through another day. Transmission Month 6. This is Communications Director Alvara Chase, New America Emergency Government, broadcasting from Raven's Nest Primary Facility. Spring reconnaissance teams report the first green shoots emerging in the southern agricultural zones. Atmospheric radiation levels have dropped to Category 3 in 12 states. We're beginning to plan the first surface colony operations. To any survivors receiving this transmission, you are not alone. We are rebuilding. Join us. Signal strength, strong. Transmission range, continental. Status, active network, 347 confirmed survivor communities.